So, will a robot take your job? It's probably one of the biggest questions of our time, right? And the whole debate is just filled with fear and speculation. But what if we could stop guessing? What if we could treat this whole thing like a cold case? Use hard evidence and some brilliant detective work to finally crack it. Well, that's exactly what one landmark study did. And trust me, its findings are absolutely fascinating. So let's dive in. First things first, this fear, it is not new, not by a long shot. This quote is from the legendary economist John Maynard Keynes. And just look at that date, 1930. Nearly a century ago, he was already warning that our ability to build machines to replace human labor was going to become a huge problem. And for decades, it kind of seemed like he was wrong. New jobs always seem to pop up. But that brings us right to the heart of our investigation today. Here we are, all these years later, with robotics and AI that are incredibly advanced. So the question is this time finally different? Are we finally face to face with that technological unemployment Keynes warned us about? To answer that, any good investigation has to start by profiling the prime suspect. And in this case, our suspect is the industrial robot. So what are we actually talking about here? Well, according to the International Federation of Robotics, an industrial robot isn't just any old machine. It's got to be autonomous, meaning it works on its own, no human operator needed, and it's reprogrammable and multi-purpose, so you can teach it to do all sorts of different manual jobs, like welding or painting or assembly. So think of a giant robotic arm on a car assembly line, not your coffee maker. So where was our suspect lurking between 1993 and 2007? Turns out, these robots weren't everywhere. Nope, they were super concentrated in just a few manufacturing areas. And get this, the auto industry alone accounted for a whopping 39% of them. And our suspect wasn't just sitting still, it was multiplying, fast. The total number of industrial robots in the US and Western Europe quadrupled during this period. That is a massive rapid surge in machines that can do human jobs. Okay, so this leads us to the trickiest part of the whole investigation. How on earth do you prove it was the robot that was responsible for job losses and not some other economic thing going on? This is that classic problem, right? Correlation versus causation. Let's say a car factory in Detroit started losing jobs right around the same time it installed a bunch of new robots. So was it the robots that caused the job losses? Or was that whole industry already in trouble because of, say, foreign competition, and the robots were just a symptom of a bigger problem? How do you know? Well, the researchers' solution to this was just a brilliant piece of economic detective work. They realized that if they looked at robot adoption in the exact same industries, but in other healthy European economies, they could isolate the pure global technology trend. It was a genius move that strips away all the noise from problems that were just happening in the US market. And doing that gave them the robot's unique fingerprint. By seeing which industries were adopting robots on a global scale, they could then precisely measure how exposed different local US job markets, what economists call commuting zones, were to this specific trend. It's a really clean way to measure the robot's specific impact on a town or city. Okay, so we've profiled the suspect, we've isolated the fingerprint, and now it is time for the verdict. What did the data actually reveal about what happened to American jobs and wages between 1990 and 2007? Here we go. Here is the first piece of hard evidence. For every new robot introduced per 1,000 workers in a local community, the employment-to-population ratio fell by 0.37 percentage points. That is a direct, measurable, negative hit to local employment. And it wasn't just about the number of jobs available. It hit people's paychecks, too. For that same single new robot per 1,000 workers, local wages fell by nearly 0.75%. So fewer people were working, and the ones who were, well, on average, they were earning less. So what does all that actually mean in the real world? When the researchers translated those percentages into actual jobs, the conclusion was pretty stark. For every single additional industrial robot that was introduced into a community, about 6 human jobs disappeared. And this is crucial. This impact was not spread out evenly, not at all. The biggest negative effects were slammed right on routine manual jobs and blue-collar occupations. The very jobs these robots are designed to do. Meanwhile, managers, they saw almost no negative effect whatsoever. But here's one of the most surprising and maybe most concerning parts of the whole verdict. Historically, when technology gets rid of one type of job, it often creates new ones somewhere else. Think about how the car replaced the blacksmith, but it created jobs for mechanics. Well, in this case, the researchers found no significant proof of new jobs popping up in other sectors within the same community to pick up the slack. The jobs just vanished from the local economy.
So let's move on to our final section here and see how this all builds from that local evidence to the national story, and more importantly, what it means for the future.
When we zoom out from the local community to the entire country, the picture changes a tiny bit, but the overall story stays the same. The hit to jobs and wages is a little bit smaller on the national level, mainly because trade between different regions can soften the blow. But even after you account for all of that, the total effect across the entire US was still clearly significantly negative. Now you might be wondering, okay, why is this historical verdict so important for us today? Well, because this entire study, everything we've talked about, covers a time when industrial robots were still pretty rare. The total number of jobs lost was limited simply because the total number of robots was limited. We've basically been looking at the prologue. The main story is just getting started. And to really understand the scale of what's coming, just look at these projections. The global number of industrial robots is projected to nearly quadruple in the single decade between 2015 and 2025. Now, if the effects we just measured hold true, the future impact on jobs and wages could be absolutely immense. So the verdict from this case is clear. Industrial robots have had a real negative impact on jobs and wages, especially for blue-collar workers. And the forecast is just as clear. A lot more are on the way. The evidence tells us what happened. The question it leaves us with is, are we ready for what happens next?